Hello, and welcome to the Disability Myth. My name is Dominic, and I live with a fatal disease called spinal muscular atrophy. Together, my amazing caretaker, co-host, and best friend, Uriel, and I plan to debunk misconceptions, share our personal experiences, and shatter your expectations. But we're not stopping there. We're bringing in experts, thought leaders, and everyday people who are smashing through societal barriers, paving the way for a more inclusive world. Whether you're tuning in to learn, empathize, or simply to be entertained, the show promises to be an eye-opening experience that transcends boundaries. Because when it comes down to it, what makes us different is what makes us extraordinary.
Hello.
Hello! Welcome back to another episode of The Disability Myth.
With
Your handsome, humble, and hammy hosts.
Dominic Trevathan.
That's
Here I
me.
am. Hi.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can be you today. You're cool.
Sure. And you are?
I'm Uriel Ruelas.
Yeah.
Also equally handsome, humble, and hammy. If you're just watching this for the first time, you're very confused right now. But if you know, you know.
Yeah.
And today we also have a very special guest, a very special friend on the show, our good friend Victor McConnell, IT consultant, musician, and photographer. So welcome on, Victor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. Very excited.
Yeah, I know we're super excited. We were just talking about how this all got worked out. Shout out to our friend Mikey for getting us connected.
Yeah,
We actually went to high school together.
we did.
I think you were probably like a senior when we were freshmen.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, I graduated 2014, so yeah, to put the
Oh,
date on
okay,
it.
so
Oh,
probably a
okay.
junior when we were freshmen then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyways, we're really excited to have Victor on here. As you can tell if you're watching the video, Victor is missing an arm here. So Victor, can you tell us a little bit about your lack of your arm?
Yeah, sure. And to describe it to people who can't see, not only am I missing the arm, but the entire shoulder. So it's very convenient to sleep on my left side because there's nothing in the way. But yeah, there's no shoulder blade. I have half of a collarbone, and it's if you took a skeleton model and you just rip the entire arm off, that's basically what it looks like. Um, but the reason I have one arm is I was born that way. I was actually born in Russia, uh, and I was left in the hospital because it's just kind of thing. If you have a kid with this disability, that's just a hard thing to do. So they left me in the hospital, and I was fortunate enough to be put into like a normal orphanage because that also they have special orphanages for kids with disabilities, and you basically survive into your 20s, and then you'll probably just die because you're not well taken care of, and depending on your level of disability, all that kind of stuff. Somehow I ended up in Gen Pop, and uh, I was adopted when I was 2 years old. My parents who adopted me, they had a daughter of their own, and then they wanted to adopt for their second kid because they had relatives who were adopted, and they had friends who were actively adopting from Russia. And when looking around online, my mom found a picture of me and showed it to my dad, and they said, "That's our son right there." And Thanksgiving 1997, I was adopted, brought to California. And then 6 years after that, they found out that I had a blood sister in Russia, and they went to go adopt her. And they also found out that I had a younger brother, and they adopted him as well. So there's actually three of us that are all blood related.
That's wild. So
Wow.
how did they find out about your siblings?
They continue to have connections in Russia.
Okay.
And so when they were put up for adoption, they were actually separated into two different orphanages. But somebody from the adoption agency got word of that, and then let my family know. And the timing is just right because adoption is a long, lengthy, expensive process, and the timing was just right that they're able to make it happen both times.
That's so cool. That's so metal.
Well,
Being
that's a movie worthy,
I was just gonna say, like,
Like,
that sounds
wow.
like an anime villain, like origin story. Like, oh, I was left abandoned in the like winter of Russia, and like
One arm only.
that goes
Yep.
so hard. That's cool. I mean, not cool that you were orphaned, but like just the whole story of, you getting adopted and finding your siblings. That's super cool, man.
Yeah,
Is
I mean,
it
I'm much better off now, I guarantee, from what it could have been. So yeah, it's in the long run, it's a neat story, and yeah, grateful for the way it turned out.
did your arm just not fully develop, or is it part of a some sort of illness or disease, or just like when the DNA was like doing its thing, it's kind of like nope.
The best guess is there was a birth control going around at the time that was causing deformities, but also our biological parents were heavy drinkers and drug users. So my siblings have small, well, my brother was born with two thumbs on one hand, and they just snipped that off when he was born. And I believe my older sister, uh, she has like one less tooth, but her teeth like look normal. So it was like at the dentist, they did like a scan. And we're like, oh, hey, that's interesting. You're missing. Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, I mean, they got the. I'm the one that drew the short straw, but
That's interesting because growing up with my disability, a lot of times people ask me like, oh, because my mom deals with alcoholism, and so did my dad. Lots of drug use in my family and alcohol abuse. And people always ask me like, oh, is it because like your parents drank or did this and that? I'm like, no, I just got like genetically lucky
So
or unlucky.
we had actually gone to the high school twice this past week
Yeah,
to do. He's doing motivational speaking at the high school with Miss Dickey's classroom, and he was talking about both his parents, you know, like drugs, alcoholism aside, both of them just carried the SMA gene.
yeah. And the probability of being born with SMA is 0.0001, and that's just the odds of any two people meeting, reproducing, and then adding on the 25% chance of getting the recessive allele for SMA. And yeah, it's nutty.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with alcohol or drugs.
Yeah, the genetics I got. It's like, oh dang.
Yeah,
I hope you play the lottery, man.
for real. Yeah.
Oh, you should have. Yeah, you should have bought a ticket from last. Was it yesterday that they drew the Mega Million?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh,
I
shoot.
remember one time I got a scratch and I got like $100 and it was the best day ever.
Well, there you
Well,
go.
that's a good sign. I don't know when they pull the Mega Million. That means I'm not a gambler. It's like I'm not really. I
Let's
don't know
go
about.
gambling.
I mean, we could each buy a ticket and like do our own numbers and then
I mean, I already play
sue
fantasy
each
football.
other.
I already play fantasy football, so I'm already halfway there.
Oh gosh.
Anyways, let's get into our icebreakers. I think Uriel had a very good one to start us off here.
Well, it's one that I've done in the past, and it's gotten kind of watered down or kind of. I find it interesting, but I used to involve like a wizard holding you hostage at gunpoint, and then I took that one off, where it's the wizard's gonna turn you into a hot dog.
Just give us the OG. Tell us about the wizard.
Uh,
Give us the whole story.
you're being held at gunpoint by a magical wizard, and he says, "I'm going to turn you into a hot dog and eat you." You get to pick the bun, the meat, the condiments, a relish, toppings, whatever. This is it. This is it.
You going out as a hot dog.
You're going out as a hot dog. How would you like to go out?
Well, it's probably not a fun answer, but if you really think about it, probably no condiments and, maybe just a bun because why would I want to be covered in, mustard and ketchup before being eaten? It's like,
Valid.
I've also gotten that answer of people who are like, oh, for the wiener, it's just all nails. It's just like, oh. Or then some people get like really nostalgic. Oh, well, I went to Coney Island and I really love a Coney Island hot dog. Oh, you always get like a wide thing of
I mean, I
it.
could put onions on there, so there's an excuse to why I'm crying. I mean, that
That's
could.
true.
Yeah, see,
And you would leave him with bad breath, so there's that too.
Mm-hmm.
it's always like a funny answer, and I don't know. I tried using it on like dates, and it never really goes out too well because it's like, oh, this person's insane. I'm like, yeah, hot
I
dogs.
think that's such a good conversation starter. Like, if you ask your date what kind of hot dog you would choose to be if you were about to be eaten by a magical wizard.
This is also one of the reasons why I took the wizard with the gun out because it adds,
Well, he has a gun too.
yeah, gunpoint. You completely missed that.
I didn't hear that part. Why does he need a gun if he has magic?
That's
That's
part
But you
of
can't
the
see the
fun.
magic, but you can see the gun. Maybe that's it.
Yeah. He got tired of people saying he can't make things disappear. He put it in his own.
It's like I'm gonna make your life disappear.
Um, So I think the whole wizard part out of it, because like, oh, you get a, what if you were a hot dog? What would you be? I feel like it's a little bit more wholesome, not as like crazy.
Yeah.
And people give a not so crazy answer. But
Okay. Well, Victor's going out dry, no condiments, nothing. All right, good to know, good to know.
poor wizard, he's gonna start choking.
He's gonna
He's gonna like materialize a glass of water, like you know.
Well, maybe that's the exit plan right there. That's the escape plan.
Oh, true, true. He can't eat you if he like chokes you out. Coughs you up.
Sentient hot dog. It's like that one bad movie, Sausage Party.
Oh, I hate that movie. God no. I was thinking more along the lines of like Pickle Rick from Rick and Morty. Oh, Pickle Rick.
I remember that.
Yep. All right, so another hypothetical situation. You're trapped in the last video game, TV show, piece of media that you've consumed. What's your situation? Are you screwed? What's going on?
It would be Star Trek. I think I'd probably be all right. They've yet to find themselves in a situation that they can't get out of.
Hey, that's a
Uh,
good point.
Oh,
So yeah, it just depends on, as long as I'm not wearing a red shirt, I should be fine.
Are you super familiar with Star Trek? Because I haven't personally watched a whole lot of it.
when I was younger, I would watch reruns of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s one
Mhm.
of it, and a lot of it went over my head. But I just kind of watched it just to watch it because I didn't want to go to bed right away out of like
Uh,
defiance against my parents. Like, no, I'm not going to bed. I'm watching TV. Like, what are you watching? Something good, even though I didn't know what was happening. It's like the one where uh I forget the actor, but it eludes me, but whatever the colored live action TV one, maybe you might be familiar with it.
I don't know. Are you talking about Star Trek Next Generation?
It might be that one.
With Captain Picard, the bald guy?
Yeah, I think it might have been that one.
uh,
But yeah, no, we're more Star Wars
yeah,
nerds here,
yeah,
for better or for worse. You know,
yeah,
whatever Disney like puts in our mouths, it's like okay,
yeah.
you know.
I don't know if you can, if the mic's picking up my house phone right now, getting a call from Rite Aid.
Hmm.
And prescription's ready.
Prescription's ready. Anyways, okay. So probably not too screwed in Star Trek. If you could go back in time and give a piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Yeah, I think some of that is, I could really get into the philosophy of all that. But I'll say, it really depends on age and all that stuff. I don't know if I have like a global advice that would apply to myself, you know, at any age. Uh, but probably, and maybe we'll get deeper into this topic, but it'd be to learn to ask for help. Uh, you know, you don't have to do everything. You can do things, but you got to weigh, is it worth it? Do you want to? Do you want to waste your time with that? Because that's something I didn't even until recently really uh, start to learn that lesson and the weight of always trying to be independent to the point where, it can be a detriment.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. You know, dealing with my SMA, it's degenerative, and so as I get older, I get weaker, and I lose more and more function the older I get. Not as much anymore, given that I'm on treatment now.
Yeah,
But
Esperanza.
Spinraza, yeah,
The 20th, we're going back.
30th.
Oh
Yeah,
shoot.
yeah. And before Spinraza, because Spinraza only came out, it was only FDA approved once I
2014?
2016 or
Oh
17.
wow.
And at that point, I was already about 18 years old and had lost a lot of function. I've talked about this before, but I used to be able to crawl and have a lot more mobility. Now I'm entirely, obviously, power wheelchair dependent and rely on help for all my activities of daily living. There is stuff I can still do though. Um, I can still feed myself. I can still, write, albeit it's pretty tiring and taxing. And yeah, so I totally get the need or not wanting to ask for help because me personally, I never wanted to ask for help growing up because I knew if I got help, I would be putting myself in a deeper position of like losing my mobility. Because if you don't use what you have, you lose it. And that's how SMA works. The less you use your motor, um, the less you use your voluntary muscles, the quicker you lose your control of them. And so that kind of put me in this position growing up where I said to myself, oh, I don't want help with anything that I can do. And as you said, that can be also a detriment because you put yourself through so much hell just to do like the simplest of tasks at times. For a long time, uh, with my like video game controllers, people would put them on a desk where I could reach them. And up until I think I was probably 18 or 19, I could reach for them on my own, but it kept getting increasingly and increasingly more difficult. And I would spend like anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes just
Mhm.
trying to grab the remote on my own. I don't know if you ever remember seeing me do that like in high school.
Um, I don't remember, but I
Yeah.
remember you talking about it.
Yeah, because I would probably just ask you to get it so I didn't like embarrass myself in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, now you have a happy medium where you're fiercely independent and you know what you're capable of. So you ask for
hmm
help, for setup, for and all this stuff to get you going,
Yeah,
you know.
the gaming position.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the gamer mode.
Yeah. Gotta have like my laptop in front of me. Gotta have my phone on top of my like laptop to the side.
Yeah,
Gotta have my controls on the right side of my laptop, like all in a specific position. I don't know if it's like that for you,
the Goldilocks.
where like everything
That's right.
like perfectly
Yeah.
orientated to make life easier for you.
Well, specifically with video games, I can use a controller, like a general Xbox, PlayStation controller, and I sit it on my right knee and I use my left foot to do the joystick, and then my
Oh,
hand
that's
does
sick.
literally everything else. And there's videos on YouTube of me playing games under the handle One Armed Freak. That's the number one ARMEDFREAK. Anyway,
There's your
um,
plug.
yes, and I also generally I prefer to play with a keyboard and mouse, just it's more comfortable for most things. And so I have a keyboard that sits on the floor, and I use the arrow keys and then the control and some other binds in that immediate vicinity. And that's also demonstrated in my uh, gaming YouTube channel where I talk in detail what the binds look like and how I have set it up. But that is really inconvenient to kind of change gears into a similar topic. That is really inconvenient when video games don't allow you to rebind. So I've had the opportunity to talk directly with some executives at Bethesda. I went to E3 and I met a bunch of those people, and that was
That's
kind of interesting.
so cool.
And I played Rainbow Six Siege on stage. That was pretty cool. And but anyway, uh, that was a big thing, was reaching out to a lot of these game developers and saying or giving them some advice on accessibility features. But one of the main ones is universal key binding, or being able to change any key binds to anything. And there's some games that do that phenomenally. In fact, Black Ops, Call of Duty, I really commend the way that they've approached that now. You can have duplicate keybinds, and your keybinds save between games. So if you're playing, Modern Warfare and you want to go to Black Ops 5, your
Okay.
keybinds are consistent. You don't have to set them up every single time. Very nice. I really like that idea, because when I get a new game, it's like a 15-minute setup of all
Yeah.
Oh
my
yeah.
binds. And if you
Yep.
accidentally click like restorative default or something like that, it's just like, okay, I'm just not going to play this game today because it's
I
and I've also
feel
had games that I've had to return because there's things that you can't bind, and it's like, okay, well, it's not even worth for me to try to figure out how to use that.
Mhm.
Uh,
yeah.
so, um, yeah, and that's been like an overarching thing. For the most part, I haven't really got like accessibility tools. Never really got into like prosthetics, and there's reasons for all that. Um, so I've just learned to make do with what exists, and adapting myself to the world rather than trying to find ways for, tools in between.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think what it comes down to as well is uh things like video games are recreational. They're supposed to bring us joy and
Mhm.
escape from reality. And when we have to spend 15 minutes before we play the game trying to adapt the settings to our level of function,
Yep.
that is kind of defeating the purpose.
Yeah, LAN parties, it's a huge pain if we want to pick a new game. And it's like, okay, guys, you guys have fun while I get myself all situated. Or to find out
Exactly.
that it's like, okay, well, you guys can keep playing. I'm not going to be able to play this one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, like you said, luckily a lot of game developers are finally allowing us, giving us more options. That like sometimes I hear like really doo-doo poo-poo takes online. It's just like, oh, there's too many features, too many accessibility options. I'm like, oh, then don't use them, bro. Like,
Yeah.
just
yeah, they're not for you.
I remember there was people complaining about what was it, the arachnophobia toggle on like The
Oh,
Last Jedi, I think.
yeah, that was funny. I mean,
Like who cares? Just don't use it.
yeah.
Like it's not for you, dude. It's um
We
no,
we also had an episode on because I know in PC they're pretty forward on the key bind, like Victor said on the key binding, like accessibility options. But the console, whenever I watch you play a console game, it's always like a third of the graphical or key binding options that I have on PC, and I'm like,
yeah,
oh man,
yep. Well, the nice thing about like because I have the PS5 is um you can actually go into your console settings and directly change your bindings for buttons across all games,
Oh, that's nice.
which is very nice. The only issue is like if I have usually I'll have my L1 and L2 like both of my triggers and my bumpers flipped so that my bumpers are my triggers and my triggers are my bumpers because it's a lot easier for me to
oh
hit the bumpers
yeah,
than the actual
Sure.
triggers just because I don't have a whole lot of strength in my finger and I don't have like the ability the reflexes right to pull it super fast. So instead of doing all of that to hit a trigger, I can just for a bumper do that.
hmm.
Right.
So that works better for me, but at the same time, for as much as I like that feature, I don't because it may work well for one game, but not work for a different game. If I'm playing like Madden, those settings work really well. Um, but if I'm playing an RPG, like a role-playing game or
I know
something,
Monster Hunter like bullies you a bit.
like my controls that I need for God of War Ragnarok
Oh yeah,
are extremely different from the controls I require to play Madden. So yeah,
yeah.
but no, that's interesting. That's really cool that you got to go talk to like Bethesda and devs
Yeah.
there.
Well, it's like it's nice. It's nice because it's like they care, they listen. It's really cool to like have you on and especially have actual people with a disability or like a missing limb, like tell them like, yo, this is what I'd like to see. And hopefully they keep doing that.
Yeah.
That's cool that you're super involved in all that in the
Yeah.
community and whatnot. And so I think like as a byproduct of being so involved in public spaces and communities, you probably deal with a lot of misconceptions that others may have about you. So do you mind sharing, some of the misconceptions that are kind of prominent and like how you navigate them?
Yeah. Specifically with having one arm, a really common one is because I'm a congenital amputee, born without the limb. I don't have any trauma associated and I didn't lose anything. So that's a key point. Um, but I get asked all the time, oh, what's it like only having one arm? And it's like, well, here, I can ask you the same question. What's it like not having three arms? Same experience. You can't conceptualize it, though you can be in a situation, maybe you're doing the dishes and you think, oh man, a third hand to grab that thing would be really useful right now. That's the same thing, just my situation may be different when I, have that kind of thought where for the most part, it's not consequential. Like talking to you, having one hand means nothing other than the fact that we're discussing it, but it's not impeding me in any way. But, if I got a phone call and I want to be holding the phone and then I want to reach for a drink that's to the side of me, then it'd be like, oh yeah, second hand right now would be useful.
Be very
Um,
convenient. Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, for the most part, in my world, uh, the way I experience having any kind of limitation is just I just see it as an inconvenience in the same way that and I'll use the word normal because that's just a term that we understand, but yeah, any normal person would run into levels of inconvenience. Let me give you another one along those lines. You're walking in from the grocery store into your garage, you're holding 6 bags and the door is locked and you go, oh man, so what do? You put all the bags down, you have to get into your pockets, you have to get your keys, and then you can unlock the door. That was really inconvenient. And depending on the type of person you are, maybe it was a bad day and you do explode, but for the most part, you just go, oh shoot, and then you deal with it and you adapt to that situation. I would run into the same exact thing. I just might be carrying less bags when that, becomes an inconvenience.
That's a very valid, very interesting point. It reminds me of my bathroom situation, and just how inconvenient it is. Most people can just we'll use guys as our example here. We can just stand at the toilet and urinate,
Yeah.
no problem. Whereas I have to, take my table off of my chair, remove the armrests from the side of my chair, have to put a sling under my ass,
Yeah.
behind my back,
Yeah.
hook it up to a whole contraption like a Hoyer lift, and then have someone else help me with all this, transfer me to my bed, unhook the sling from the lift, remove the lift, undress me, grab my urinal, then I can go pee. Like it's a, to say the least, an inconvenience, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, and to stay on this topic, I could give some other examples. I get people all the time who break their arm and they're like, "Oh, yeah, now I know what it's like to be like you." And it's like, well, okay. But also what's interesting is if you look at that for the first maybe week or so of having a broken arm in a cast, it's horrendously inconvenient. And then that starts to taper as you adapt and you figure out how to, that you're not going to, this one hand is not going to be as functional. So you already start to adapt things. And, unless you're in that cast for, 6 years, you're still going to have inconveniences until that cast comes off. But again, the level of inconvenience slowly lowers as you adapt. It's the same thing for people with disabilities. It becomes part of your situation. It adapts. You still experience inconvenience, but there's also a mental component to it on how you handle those situations. Now, on that topic, let me give you another good example. You go to the store. This would apply well to people in wheelchairs, because I was asked recently, what's it like living in a world designed for two-handed people? And it's probably easier to answer, what's it like living in a world designed for people who can walk? This is a similar thing. This is what it's like. You go to the store, an able-bodied person, maybe you're short, and what you want is on a top shelf, and you're like, oh man, I got to go get somebody. Or another example, you go to Home Depot and you want to get whatever it is, and it's in a locked cabinet, and you're like, oh shoot. Maybe you're socially awkward, so you think, I just don't want to deal with the social interaction that's going to be required for this situation, so I'm just going to buy it on Amazon, and then you get out of there. Or ahead of time, the thing I want to buy is going to be locked, so the first thing I'm going to do when I come into the store is I'm going to go find somebody and say, hey, I want to go get this thing. Do you mind going over there and unlocking it for me? If you're in a wheelchair, it's going to be a similar process. You may roll up to somewhere and realize, oh, what I want, oh shoot, it's up at the top shelf, or it's locked, or whatever it is. It's just not accessible to me right now. Like it could be for anybody else, depending on what the circumstance is. So you got to go get somebody. If it's part of your routine and your procedure, then ahead of time, going to the store, you have this level of inconvenience in your mind, and I got to go get somebody to help me with this situation. I'm not trying to trivialize any disabilities, but I am trying to explain that the actual feelings that you have when you're inconvenienced in that way is almost universal. It's not a foreign thing. So disabled people aren't living like a foreign experience. It's just the level of inconveniences we feel. That threshold is just a little different. But our emotional response is not an unrealistic thing to imagine. People say, oh, I can't imagine what it'd be like. Yes, you can. When you broke your hand and you had trouble washing the dishes and you're frustrated, I have those days too. So, and in a similar way on this topic, the reason we can make it so relatable is like you and I, Dominic, we grew up and we were raised in the same society as all these able-bodied people. So cognitively, we're basically right there with them.
Yep.
And for example, I say, I'm going to go wash my hands. I'm sure that you say, hey, we're going to go on a walk.
All the time,
we're not going to needlessly filter ourselves and our language to have ourselves in our own little bubble.
Okay.
But because of that, cognitively, we learn the same way how to respond to situations. When our mom is inconvenienced bringing groceries into the car, we may carry that same level. If she is a super frustrated person, we might be a super frustrated person when we run an inconvenience. If our parents are calm, cool, collected all the time, that may spill over to us. So it is somewhat of an individualistic, whatever. It depends on the person. Um,
Yeah.
but it's not, and it's not always a disability that is the biggest hindrance in those situations. It's a lot about attitude. And I don't know. I guess the point is it's much easier to empathize with these disabilities if you realize that uh, you what they're experiencing is inconvenience, and everybody does.
That's a really good way to sum it up, I
I think
think.
that was very beautifully like
Yeah, I've never,
described,
in all my years, never
like
thought about it as an inconvenience, but that's extremely accurate.
it was
If you
crazy.
don't mind on another quick rant, this is a good one.
Yeah.
Burdensome. I've been following your podcast, and the first episode you were talking about the burden complex.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This is something I put a lot of thought into because I struggled with this so deeply. It was so important for me to be wildly independent. For example, video games. I didn't want to be good at video. I didn't want to be able to play video games. I want to be good enough to beat my friends, and that was really important. Same thing. Getting into I have. If you can't see, I have a bunch of pianos behind me. I'm into music, and we'll talk about that. But I didn't just want to be able to play a piano. I wanted to be objectively good, and I hid my ability for a long time. I didn't let people know that I played the piano because I didn't know if people would be like, "Oh, that's pretty good for somebody with one hand," or if it would just be objectively good music. And it was really hard to gauge because, of course, people are going to be impressed no matter what. It wasn't until I started meeting musicians that I started getting honest feedback, and that was something super valuable to me. But anyway, um, I didn't like to ask for help because I felt like I'm putting somebody out there, I'm causing them a horrible inconvenience, and over time, I started to realize, for the most part, people just want to help. For me, having one hand, one of the biggest things, other than clapping, one of the biggest things for me that I can't do is like go through a buffet line and serve myself if there's not a place to set my plate. I can't eat standing up because I have no way to hold the plate and get food off the plate, or
Right.
carry a drink and the plate at the same time. Depending on that whole setup. And I know those things going in. And in the past, I would just not get a drink because I didn't want to deal with that, trying to figure that thing, or maybe not go to the buffet line because I could see that there's nowhere for me to set my plate, and I would just rob myself of the experience that everybody's enjoying because I didn't want to figure out how to adapt to that situation or just ask for help. Finally, when I started to learn to ask for help, I realized nobody's looking at me like, "Oh, poor little one-armed kid, I can't wait to help you," and blah blah blah. They're just like, "Oh yeah, sure, no problem." And the same way I ask my friend, like, "Hey, can you hold this for me real quick?" Or if somebody's carrying a heavy box, "Hey, let me help you with that real quick." There's no like, I'm helping you because you're incapable of doing it yourself. I Here's a great example. You open the door for somebody walking up. Do you do it because it's like, "Oh, well, you're not going to be able to do it yourself, so I'll do it for you"? No, it's just like, "Oh, that's a polite thing to do." In that same example, this is a really funny one. All the time, if I got $1 every time this happened, I would, I'd be pretty well off.
Have a
I
lot of
have, I have,
pianos.
I have a
Yeah.
can of soda, with the pop top.
Yeah.
All the time, people say, "Oh, let me help you with that," and then they'll open it with one hand, and it's like
That's
I couldn't.
so hilarious.
But it made me realize that it's the same thing with like the door opening thing. It's almost selfish, not in a nefarious way, but they're not thinking about it on what I need. They're thinking about how they can help.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
again, you can have a detriment on either side, being too independent, being not dependent enough, or codependent. Um, and so finding that balance is really important.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I learned that lesson a little too late because similar to you, Dominic, I also had a spine fusion from my neck to my tailbone, though. So my entire spine is fused. And I continued after that, still doing a lot of hard labor, working in attics, under houses, doing my IT stuff and doing things that I really could have had other people help me with. And my back, my physical health is worse off because I didn't, I wanted to be able to do it. I wanted to prove to whoever, an audience, to myself, that I could do it. But here I am on the other side of it. I'm 29 years old and my back feels like I'm 60. And I know I could have at least, made it feel like I'm a 40-year-old person instead of 60 if I would have asked for more help when I was younger. And um, that's one of those things that I really wish I just learned that lesson sooner. That you can
Yeah.
do things, but is it worth it? Do you want to? In the same way, an
Right.
able-bodied person does the same thing. They can do things, and an able-bodied person would ask for help in certain situations. So why can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, I think that's an important point because in society, when you're young, people just value this fierce independence, forgetting that the reason why humanity has existed for so long is because we're so communal,
Hmm.
that we're a species that was meant to work together. And I think one of the things that helped you get over the burden complex, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the fact that like people are they want to help you because they want you there.
Yeah, like
They want you to experience that. They want you to eat. They want see they want, Victor, they want you at the buffet.
at the
Yeah, I mean,
buffet. Yeah.
yeah, they want you there,
Yeah. Hell yeah. No, that's cool. And honestly, this conversation reminds me a lot of, of well, the speaking I did at the high school recently, um, talking about my experiences going through college, going to a 4 year, living independently. I wanted to live independently at the dorms at UCLA, have my whole nursing staff set up in place so that I could have that, quintessential college experience. And honestly, I can say it may not have been worth it for all the stress and the struggle that it brought me, having to manage my care staff on top of being a student, on top of managing relationships, top of going to doctor's appointments, getting my prescriptions, dealing with my own health. It's a lot to balance. And again, it goes back to wanting to be, fiercely independent, both for yourself and for how you appear to society. Like we always say, we live in a comparative society. And when I didn't get my 4 year degree in 4 years, and I saw my peers with their 4 year degrees posting on Instagram, I'm like, shoot, like
hmm
I'm so lame. Those thoughts of self-doubt creep in and take hold, and that adds to the burden complex. And it's so tough to dig yourself out of those mental holes because you're stuck in this negative feedback loop where, oh, I need to do better. I need to, you know, be on the same level as my peers, if not on a higher level, quote unquote. But I can't because of, or I felt like I couldn't because of my situation I was in where my nursing was unreliable. People wouldn't show up. I would have to communicate and advocate for myself on top of other people. And that's burdensome. Yeah.
In terms of uh, this comparison on capable people, when I play the piano, when I do play the piano for people,
Yeah.
very common to have people say, "Oh, you can play so much better than me," or "I wish I learned to play the piano," and yada yada. And what's interesting about that though is in those moments, they're looking at me as a disabled person. In some cases, they're amazed by my disability that I'm playing the piano. But in those circumstances, I'm actually the more capable one because they're admitting that they don't know how to play the piano. And it's like, okay, well, look, our physical differences is not the limiting factor here. Then it's for some people playing the piano, it's a mental hurdle that they're not able to spend time on to overcome, or whatever it may be. But it's interesting, and again, to kind of highlight those differences and breaking down these barriers on what is a disability, and the differences. I think really it's probably, I don't know if there needs to be a better word or anything like that for it, but there's just such a connotation with disability, and it immediately puts you in this group, and the first thought is, oh, what this person can't do.
Yeah.
And to me, this self-esteem, self-doubt, man, this was a really tough thing, and it still gets to me to this day. No matter what I am able to achieve, how well I can play the piano, how well I can play video games, when I walk into the grocery store, to all those people there, I'm a guy with one hand. And it's, their thoughts are based on what I can and can't do. And it's very hard to not do that. And it's like, there's no way I can shatter all of these expectations. And the first time I sit down and play the piano, the first note I play, wow, look at that one-armed person doing something. And it'll take time. I'll have to get through whatever piece it is until they can come around to it being objectively good, if they're in the mindset to be able to be receptive to something like that. But it causes almost an identity crisis because it's like, well, I'm not defining myself. I'm Victor. That's who I am to me. I'm who's in up here. I'm not this. This
Yeah.
never comes up, but you make it come up. You are the one who's making me feel disabled. And I don't know if there's a point or something that I can articulate and put a nice bookend to this whole deal, but it is one of those things where maybe because I just don't have an answer to it yet, or I haven't finished processing these feelings, but I know that that is a very common thing in the disabled community. This self-doubt, this imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
just low self-esteem. because we're not, again, we grew up in the same society as everybody else. Mentally, we're very similar. We don't define ourselves by our physical attributes for the most part. And
Yeah.
and yet disabled people tend to be picked on in that way, where it's,
Yeah. Well,
and-
For you, I think what you've mentioned multiple times, how I don't think it gets to you as much as it does now. But whenever we go out in public, people are like, "Oh, you're such an inspiration.
I
You're
was,
so motivating." Like sometimes that kind of gets on your nerves. It's like,
I
no, I'm
was,
just doing my thing. I'm just doing what everyone else does. It's like nothing, crazy.
I was just gonna say we had that experience the other day. We went,
Mark?
yeah,
Yeah.
we went to El Rancho Market, in between the courses that I was speaking at, and
The
we,
high school.
we ran into someone. Well, he came over to me
In a bright yellow shirt, big old smile. Yeah.
and he just, he knocks on my table with his hand. He's like, "Oh, wow, this looks expensive." And I'm like, "Oh, that's in my head. I think like, oh, that's a hell of a way to start a conversation. Like, you want to point out the difference between us, like you had mentioned." And then, we had this whole conversation about how expensive my chair is. And yeah, eventually we got onto the topic of school. And, I told him that I went to UCLA. I got my 4-year degree eventually, and I'm doing speaking and all the stuff that I do. And at the end of the conversation, I didn't feel like he totally got the idea of everything that we just talked about. Like, we want to move past those differences, because he still said like, "Oh, you're such an inspiration. It made my day talking to you today." I'm like, "Okay, that's cool, but is it because you just enjoyed my company, or because you're objectifying the disability, right?" Because
Mhm.
that's how it feels to me. And I don't know, it's again, like you said, it's difficult to process those feelings, those emotions, because as much as I want to believe that he enjoyed my company and that we were just being friendly, it deep down, like, based off of the communication that happened, or at least that's how I feel the communication went. It was very surface level.
Yes.
So yeah, no,
9 times out of 10, when we have a conversation with a stranger, they go back to somebody and they say, "Oh, I talked to this one arm guy. Oh, I talked to this guy in a wheelchair today."
Mm.
And that's
yeah,
how we're remembered. And
yeah,
as a little side thing, Dominic, I know you experience this all the time. People from high school, everybody remembers me because I'm an easy person to remember. I mean, I
yep,
have something, a tag basically, and
yeah.
then almost they get offended when I don't know who they are, and it's like, well, I don't have a reason to remember you. I mean, you just look like anybody else,
Sorry,
and
That's fair.
you're just not as cool. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the questions I wanted to ask was like, do you get people like that stare at you when you're just out and stuff?
yeah, and where I work right now, I end up having to. I work for a Santa Barbara County Education Office, and sometimes I have to visit like a preschool site. That's one of the
Oh,
worst
they're
places you can
brutal,
go.
aren't they?
Oh yeah, because it's,
Yeah,
oh,
they're
does
just
that person
kids. They're
have one
brutal.
hand? Yeah,
Oh
and
my
it's
God.
Talk
uh
about being in the
Oh,
trenches.
dude.
yeah, and I have kids like grab my sleeve and look into my sleeve and to see if there's actually one hand there and all that kind of stuff. And um yeah, people will take pictures with their phone sometimes, and for the most part, um I'm just so used to it at this point. Like, especially if there's, I was at Boomers the other day, for example, and I could see that this kid just keeps staring at me. So I'm just going to look away so they can stare at me because, I know that obviously they're trying not to get my attention because they just want to look. And it's like, I really don't care. They're curious. They can, they can look if they want to look and that kind of stuff. And I don't need to get into an interaction with them. Um, but because sometimes it's just harmless. I mean, they've never seen somebody missing an arm, and
Yeah,
they're too scared to say or ask anything. Sometimes it's
yeah.
inappropriate to ask, but other times, depending on the situation, it's like, go ahead.
That's why like I I enjoy when people are curious and give into their curiosity,
Yeah.
like Uriel.
Yeah.
Like
We had this conversation where it's like growing up, this is gonna sound a little wild. It's not necessarily a disability, but whenever I enter predominantly white spaces, those kids are like, because like they're not used to seeing like,
a brown man.
yeah. And I used to get on my nerves, and I know whenever you go out in public and people look at your chair, it gets on your nerves. But I think we've come around to the point where it's like, when it comes to children, it's good that we're there.
Yeah.
it's okay for them to give into their curiosities and like,
Yeah.
because it just becomes it's better that it becomes normalized, or it's kind of like, oh, it's like it's more important to like feed into their curiosity and normalize it and just like, yo, well, this is a thing.
Yeah. No,
I think it's a fantastic thing that we grew up with this, special ed kids in the same population as everyone else, and I think that made a big. I know it made a difference for me personally, because now it's not like, oh, those kids that are off over there and they're different and all that stuff. We'd all go to recess together, and so we knew all these kids, and then you get to high school and you have kids, like Dominic, you're in like a classroom with everybody else. So it's not like, oh, how come you're not in your class?
yeah.
And it's over time. People at first, same place. My first week on the job at my new job was, okay, here we go. Get everybody used to having this one arm guy around, and now nobody even thinks about it. So there's
It's
an
just Victor.
acclimation period.
Yeah.
But it's that exposure I think is really good, especially for kids.
Yeah.
Within the first 15 minutes, walking to like a kindergarten or first grade site, those kids get over it.
Yeah.
And they're better off. And it makes me feel better because it's like, okay, well, maybe the next guy who comes in with no arms is not going to get nearly the same kind of accosting that I did.
Yeah.
Helping one arm at a time. Yep.
Yes.
I uh I made it a point to just be, as down to earth as I could and be myself when I was giving these talks at the high school last week. And, you know, something that sticks out is the teacher had everyone ask me questions in groups afterwards. And they asked me stuff like, "Oh, who's your favorite football player? Oh, what's your favorite food?" And me just being the stupid, millennial I am, I'm like, "Oh, I really like chicken tendies. Um, dino nuggets go hard."
Yeah.
Like just trying to break down those barriers in communication by being goofy, by being lighthearted, I think helps a lot too. Because, I sat in front of these freshmen 5 different occasions this past week, and obviously they're staring at me because I'm speaking, but it just felt good to, you know, get a laugh or two when saying stuff like that because it reminds you, oh, we're not so different. This guy likes chicken tendies too, Like,
I think the thing that always shines through is just honesty.
yeah,
Just like not trying to like have a facade or like be someone else. It's like, yep, I'm
I'm not,
Dominic.
yeah,
I like chicken tenders.
I'm not trying to be that person that came in here saying like, oh, I have a college degree, I'm better than you all.
It's fresh.
Like,
It's funny.
I'm just trying to be a human being,
Mm.
And that's I think what's really helpful when it comes to, bridging that gap in understanding between that disabled and non-disabled experience.
Hmm. Yeah, to a certain extent, I tell people like me having one hand is a piece of trivia about me. I mean, and that's almost like how I see it because again, it's up here when we have a conversation, it's irrelevant. Or like when I'm playing music, it's irrelevant. It's not a part of uh my identity or my existence. Me having one hand is inconsequential to the fact that I gravitate towards music and I play music. Yeah, I have to adapt to do that. Um, but it's having one hand is not a part of that journey. Um, it's more of a mental expression and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, man. Well, that's cool. We got pretty deep there for a minute. That was
Yeah.
fun. Again, we gotta do a sequel to this episode and get some more into there.
Yeah,
But
well, they're important topics for sure,
yeah,
especially for audience members that are watching that might never really think about it all that much. It's like, oh, huh, you
yeah.
know.
But yeah, no, I do want to spend some time kind of asking you about the stuff that you have going on in your life, the things that you do. And yeah, so let's speaking of music, we wanted to ask, what specifically inspired you to initially play piano and, you know, get so good, like objectively good. I think you kind of touched on it, talking
Yeah.
about just wanting to be good, period, regardless of, your disability. And yeah, let's just talk about more of that. Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at my name on YouTube or just on Google, I have a website, Victor McConnell. You'll find everything about me and all my music stuff. But my dad side of the family, super musical, and we have like a billion pianos in the house. So I just mess around and tinker around and whatnot, and um, very self-conscious. never showed anybody what I was doing because I didn't well, one, my dad is a phenomenal piano player, so it's like the comparison was happening right away where it's like, oh yeah, I'm never going to be at that level. Took me a long time, especially with music, any kind of creative thing, to realize that that comparison doesn't, you don't do that. There's no point. You can't
Hmm.
compare art in that way. Um, and once I moved to where I'm at now, a big thing for me is I've always wanted to film my music. I've always been interested in photography and film, and so I've recorded piano stuff when I was like a older teenager and getting into my 20s. I started recording stuff I was writing as I started coming out of my shell. And but it was really inconvenient because I didn't learn how to music. I didn't learn the piano in the traditional way. It was all by feeling and just figuring it out. If anything, I'm playing more of the geography of the piano, like what it feels good under my fingers and just what I'm hearing versus what chords and yada yada. Um, but it was really challenging because setting up the camera and doing all that kind of stuff, it'd be really hard then to start playing because I would either forget what I did by the time I had everything set up, um, or just the original feeling and stuff wouldn't be there because now I'm performing and I'm like, okay, I'm recording. And so I have to keep stopping and starting because it wasn't right and all that kind of stuff. When I moved here, it's a priority to lower the barrier of entry to just be able to start playing. And so, like right now, the room I'm in, my little studio, the mics and everything are recording all the time. As soon as I start playing, it triggers and it records the notes that I did. Everything is, and then it's all backed up to another computer that I render things on and master and all that kind of stuff. But that significantly improved my creative process. Now I can just come in and I can just write. I can just play. I started to learn music theory. I'm significantly more confident than I was 2 years ago, and now I can break something down or write it out or read it, which is a whole nother level of uh, improvement and something I would, if you're interested in music, just learn chords like that. Make that a priority. Don't suffer needlessly. Learn chords. But anyway, um, it really, the piano was a way for me to express myself. I dealt with a lot of grief growing up, and having the pianos and stuff like that. I mean, it was just a way for me to, instead of crying out loud, it was the sound of the piano. And um, I didn't know how to really play. I just knew how to do certain little things, and so I just operated in these little areas of the piano. Again, the geography of the piano. I just worked in this one little area of the piano, just making little tone poems, things that sounded nice. As I expanded on my knowledge of the piano and learning theory, then I was able to intelligently expand on stuff and actually know where I'm going. Um, but it took a very long time to be okay with the simplicity of what I was playing. I always felt that I had to play at a technical level and
Yeah.
I had to make these really big, massive chords and stuff like that because otherwise it's like, oh, well, I do hear people all the time, oh, you're only playing one note in the bass. It's like, does it need more to sound good? And as people hear the music that I produce, it is simple in nature, but it's objectively, it sounds good, and it doesn't need to have 40 notes to be any better than it is. I have some pieces that I purposely wrote with just one hand, 3 notes at a time, and really, when you listen to any music, listen to, you pick any track basically, and you pick out one instrument. Nobody is shredding at any given time. They're all playing simple stuff all together.
Yeah.
And while there are times for solos and stuff like that, but for the most part, music itself, um, it's simplistic in nature. And a lot of the most beautiful pieces out there, Claire de Lune would be one of those.
Yeah.
The simplest intro you can imagine, but man, is it pretty, and is it expressive? And then and that's always what's drawn me. But realizing and talking to musicians that's like, okay, yeah, that's it right there. That's music. That's what connects with people.
Mm.
Made me realize that, oh, I can do this. Having one arm is inconsequential because I have it up here. I can do that up here. I know how to feel through the keys, and that's more important than how many notes you can play.
Right. That's really cool. So my follow-up question is, obviously simplicity is a good thing here. That's what we're talking about. It, as we just talked about, though, you felt like at first you needed to play um very technically. Um is and I've seen your videos, I've seen your content. You play with your hand and your foot. So can you tell us about maybe like why you've also use your foot at times
Mhm.
and your process with like trying to do that, or even like what was a moment you had where you're like, oh, this would sound really good if I, could use my foot to help me.
Yeah, at some point I also film interviews on my YouTube channel, and at some
Mm.
point I'll do one on myself where I'll do a really deep dive in this topic. But to give you the summary, I was probably 8 or 9 when I figured out how to use my foot, and I originally started using my foot to play video games. I didn't put a keyboard on the floor; I just had it up on my desk, and I just figured out how to, bring my foot up to my desk and
Yeah.
play video games like that. And then that kind of like was like, oh well, I can do that on the piano. And I didn't know chords. I just knew, well, if I make this bass note the same as this note over here, it's going to sound good together. And it's one of those things where I do wish I learned music at a younger age, but also on same time, I'm kind of glad I didn't, because what music teacher would say, put your foot on the keys? So I may not have figured that out if I would have been traditionally trained. Uh, but yeah, it's one of those things where uh, I was just experimenting, exploring, and adapting and figuring out how I can do something. That's where fierce independence was a positive in that case, because I was the one who was going to figure this thing out. What two-handed person is going to tell me how to play with one hand? Um, and uh, yeah, over time, uh, I just started to kind of optimize that process. And uh, I had a surgery when I was 17. That's when I had my back surgery.
Mm.
Drastically messed up my flexibility, and I could no longer bring my foot up to my desk anymore. And that's when I figured out how to put a keyboard on the floor and stuff like that. But also affected the way I could play the piano. And it took a long time to gain back the kind of flexibility that I have now. But it's not even close to what it was. In fact, uh, the chair, I can only really comfortably play the piano if my chair is super high off the ground. Um,
Mm.
when I play pianos in people's houses, I can do it, and I'm just like super contorted, and my back is going to be wrecked later that evening. And I have to weigh, is it worth playing the piano and showing off
Yeah.
versus the hours of pain that it's going to come later? Um, but yeah, it's one of those things that I am very grateful that I have been able to continue to play, and still able to play in a way that's very fulfilling to me. No longer, I used to think, oh, I'm never going to be able to play like Elton John. And that would make me reflect on, well, it's because you have one hand. Well, I know two-handed people who can play the piano that are never going to be able to play like Elton John. So again,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily because I'm using my foot that's preventing me from doing that. Maybe it's just not my, well, really, it's not the style that I like to play. I love to hear it, but it's just not the style that I like to play. I can play exactly the way I want to play. And that was it took time to realize that I'm doing exactly what I want to do.
Yeah. That's dope. You have any follow-up questions? I've been kind of hogging the mic.
No, you're fine. Um, you've already answered. You do
I am not
compose.
left-handed. That's a common one.
It took me a second. I had to look and like remember the orientation
Yeah.
because it's like reversed on his camera.
Um, you do compose and it's on your YouTube channel. Excellent. Do you perform with other people at all or just
And in a limited capacity, I did do a gig recently for SELPA. It was a special ed group, and uh, I there's a certain degree of pressure there, but
yeah.
also I don't know. I'm not opposed to it, and I think it's something that I would want to experiment. I definitely want to do. I would rather do almost like a concert series where I talk and play, where I play something and I break down, kind of like what we were just doing. I break down how I came up with it and how I've adapted to it and blah blah blah, and the geography of the piano and all that kind of stuff. I think that's a lot more interesting than me just performing,
Mm,
and it also helps me get over people's expectations, because if I get to talk about it and explain it, and they get to learn and hear from me, they'll be much more connected to the music objectively than it is just watching some person do something impressive because they have one hand.
mm, cool.
Yeah.
Because you described the crazy roller coaster that is doing music at a young age and then getting older and being like, oh shoot. Because when you're younger, you have that fire and you want to be better than everybody. Oh, I'm gonna be the best. But then you reach a point where like, oh dang, I'm not the best. And that's perfectly fine. And then this like humbling period, like I told Dom where I used to play by myself so often. And then when I started performing with people, I realized, like you said, the simplicity is always better. because nobody wants to hear you play over everyone. Nobody wants to play over anyone else. And like there's a vocalist. The vocalist is a star. You're just a guitar
Mhm.
player. Shut up. Just like the piano's like handling the rhythm. You just gotta be there on time and make it sound good, and that's it. And like when you look at it like that's just like, oh, it's like we're not trying to be Jimi Hendrix or whatever. We're trying to keep the rhythm and keep everything like tight and enjoyable for people. I'm like, oh man. And it's like quite the reality check and quite the heavy-handed lesson that a lot of musicians have to go through. It's like, oh, all right, we're a collective here. And I'm pretty sure meeting with other musicians, I'm pretty sure actual musicians come up to like, oh, you're more than capable. You're fine. Like you play the chord and you're on time. Good. That's
Yep,
all they're asking of. That's all they're asking of you.
yep, I get, compliments from, musicians all the time that are uh there's a musician, Alan Satchwell. He's the one who like really started my kickstarted my YouTube uh deal and doing my interviews, because he was a musician who was like the first one to like objectively give me feedback. My dad's always given me feedback, but he's my dad, so there was always that like, how do I know? But Alan was like one of those people who was like, oh yeah, what you're doing is great, or hey, you should change this thing. And it's like, wow, I'm getting constructive criticism. You're not just like, oh yeah, that's okay. And yeah, very eye-opening. And now I have a handful of musician contacts that I'm able to send stuff to and get feedback, and they're listening to it for what it is. They're looking at the music, and they may suggest something that I physically can't do, and that's fine to me. They'll say, oh, what about this chord structure? And it's like, oh, that's really pretty, but I can't do that. So let me figure out how I could. Um, but now it's about the music, and that's
Yeah.
really cool, because before my strive for technical prowess was to impress non-musicians, and it's like, what's the point? Why am I using music and killing myself to impress people who don't even appreciate the music? Where in that way, musicians in a sense are much easier to impress.
Yeah, one thing that I'm going through right now is I'm reaching the age where like, all right, I'm never gonna be this technical monster. So now when I practice like relatively fast to a metronome only to play like slow because the feeling is what matters. Like the fewer notes that I pick that ring out the best. And like you said, we're all slave to chord. It's all chords first. So whatever solo, whatever thing I'm doing has to relate to the chord. And if
Mhm.
it's not part of the chord, it just sounds like weird. Then you're getting into like weird stuff. If you wanted to do like weird atypical harmony, whatnot.
Well,
But
that's also, if you're jazz, man, just get into jazz, and then you can do whatever you want.
I tried. I'm like pivoting from jazz more into like a fusion-y thing because it's like ooh like just straight up on like straight jazz. I love listening to it, but man, is it hard.
I do play a lot of jazz off camera. I'm really into that, but I don't film it or publish it because it's still another one of those mental hangups where, uh, of course, there's going to be mistakes or things in there that may not be quite right, and I'm not ready to be open to that kind of public criticism or comments like that. So I stick to the contemporary stuff and well polished
Yeah.
stuff.
The hardest part for with jazz is that well the hardest entry to jazz for me for the guitar was when I was younger. I thought I had to play these huge ass boxy chords and I'm like, oh no, I'm just gonna do like smaller like do like Joe Passy like chords because those are a
Mhm.
lot more efficient. And then when it comes to soloing, one of the hardest things for jazz is that jazz solos, they very much highlight the arpeggios and the chords. And if you don't know arpeggios or how to play notes of a chord like really quickly, like chord did it do, chord did it do, chord did it do, like that. Not necessarily that you have to do that, but that's very much part of that skill set. And for a
Sure.
lot of bedroom guitarists or musicians trying to get into that, it's kind of like, whoa, all right. Now I'm playing like 6 micro arpeggios to make a lead. I'm like, okay, and that could be a little intimidating for some people. I'm like, ooh,
I like jazz when it comes to I just see it as free expression. You know, I have a friend, well, actually Gabe. He always tells me, he's like, yeah, you can learn anything, but creating something, I mean, that's the hard thing. And
yeah,
And that's something I'm glad early on I got into, composing and just coming up with stuff. I think that's a very valuable skill set because I have several music friends that just can't compose. They can only play other people's work. And
Hmm.
I feel like they're robbing themselves of a big part of the experience. Um, because it's, again, you can learn anything. It's like reciting or reading a book. I mean, you can get a lot from that, but to be able to then create from that or expand on that, it's just a whole nother world. And yeah, and then now uh, you get to express yourself. You get to be an extension of
Mm,
that instrument.
cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You guys are like music nerding out. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I do want to ask a little bit about your photography though on top of that.
Well, I was pretty curious about this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Because when I like to do photography, I really like to do weird POVs, and I was just wondering what your photography style was, or like what inspires you to like take the pic, you know.
What I really love doing is actually event photography. I don't have a lot of published work because it's usually for an event, and then they don't want that put it all over the internet. But I love capturing a moment. Um, Especially events and getting people who are dancing and having a good time, and really capturing that kind of thing. I like wildlife photography for a similar way. You're getting a glimpse into the universe at any given time. And but I wasn't really into photography early on. I was really into film and video. So we might have done the same media class in at San Ynez. But I did film appreciation twice, and then their like video media, whatever it was called, when they changed the name or whatever it was.
Multimedia or East?
Multimedia, yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But it was Miss Lee,
Yeah, yeah.
and she's great, and we're still in contact. But so I was very interested in film and video. And when I got my first camera, it was a DSLR that could also do photos. And while doing some video gigs, people would just naturally ask, "Oh, can you also get a photo?" And it was like a game changer to realize, oh, a lot of this video stuff applies to photography. It's,
Mm.
so there's composition and you have to get your settings right and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I, uh, you know, started taking photos and it was like, wow, these are good photos because I'm following the same metrics as I would be filming. And then coincidentally, I just started getting more photo work. People were more interested in getting photos, and it's a lot easier to get photo jobs anyway than video work. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I just at this point now, I've probably done way more photography work than I have done video work, and I've done a lot of video work.
Well, cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, everybody's always looking for a photographer.
Yeah.
That's one thing I
Uh,
feel, yeah, people just it's like it's not the same, but I told Dom it's because my brother did some photography work and he said like once he does one gig, everybody wants him to like, yo, can you do this? Because everybody's always competing for a photographer or like competitive prices. It's like, oh, I could do this, this, that. And and then the closest thing I have to it, because I don't do a whole lot of gig photography stuff, was like dog walking. Once you not dog sitting. Once you take care of one person's dog, all of a sudden the whole town wants you to take care of their
Yeah.
dog. It's like, oh shoot. It's like, uh-oh. That's cool.
So
Yeah,
you run
feel
into the
free
same
to
problem. You get into the same problem though with like photography and music. You almost get locked into a style. So
yeah.
now it's mainly a lot of just passion projects now, or I'm very careful now what I say yes to because I don't want to turn a
Oh, for
creative thing
sure.
into uh, uh like a job or an obligation where I'm
Oh, yeah.
operating outside of my creative input to satisfy
Oh,
a
for sure.
customer or
That's
whatever it is.
one of the hardest things for a lot of creative people is to keep it fun and enjoyable. And also, it's like it's this like balance of like professionalism where like, oh, I like to work with other people and do something for other people. Maybe make some money, but that's not the goal. And then keeping it interesting, creative, pushing myself creatively.
yeah.
And it's like this constant, well,
I feel that with
yeah.
doing the podcast, with doing the radio programming I do, because I want it to be meaningful content, but at the same time it can be kind of grindy in the sense
Mhm.
it can be monotonous, just a lot of the same process of editing, of making the graphics, communicating with everybody And so there's a balance to it for sure. Yeah.
That especially happens with music production where producers go for the motion. They just like start producing. Well, like they just start grabbing the same tools. Oh, gotta add this, gotta add that. And it's like, oh yeah, we now we have something.
Yeah.
And so, like where they you fall because like unfortunately humans are very habitual. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, once if something sounds good and it feels good, I'm gonna keep doing it. And then you get like a little sad because it's like, oh, it's not sounding different. And you have to force yourself to make those small changes. It's like, oh man.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. Okay. On a kind of a final note, as we get to the end of our questions here, can you tell us a bit about your experiences in IT? I believe you're a consultant, correct?
Yeah, now I have a full-time gig. Like I said, a Santa Barbara County Education Office. So
Yeah.
I work up in Santa Maria. They have a location up there and handful of users. So it's a lot of general day-to-day support. There is some room for certain projects, but historically, I did used to have a full-time job with a school, and then I worked full-time at a hotel, the Alisal, and I lived at the Alisal for a couple of years. In fact, doing IT there, and that was very interesting experience. Just there would be times where you
Oh,
have the whole ranch to yourself, for example.
oh,
That's
And
cool.
I
oh,
was
that's
like
where
the
my
one
brother
IT guy.
works. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like the one guy for the whole place, 300 something employees.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, in between those times I was consulting and I really enjoyed that. I like being in education. I've always had an interest in education. I used to teach robotics. I used to be a board member for a school. I used to work at a school. And so where I'm at right now, great fit back in the education world. But consulting, I really liked it because you're at a different person's house every day. And the amount of people and the contacts that I was making and the problems that you're solving, um, yeah, it just really scratched that itch, that problem solving. And a lot of people, especially with disabilities, just have a little bit, we're naturally overthinkers. And so to
Mhm.
have, such a dynamic environment that requires a high level of thinking, um, as well as just a different problem every day, is really nice because I mean, Dominic, just as well as I do, at the end of the day, there's a routine, there's a procedure, and every day is very similar to have some kind of outlet where you do get a lot of dynamics. Um,
Yeah.
it's just really something that um, I'm thankful to have been able to be in the industry and be able to have that.
That's cool.
That's cool because I remember in high school we might have been on Saber Patriots at the same time. I'm not sure,
I
but
didn't do Cyber Patriots. Mikey did.
oh, okay, I see. And then I think you and your friend group might like I might have occasionally swung by or something.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
absolutely.
why.
Yeah, I was around in
Yeah.
that area. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Pop in there and see what's going on. Tell them how
Cool.
to do it right.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, we like the teacher coming to grade our homework. It's like, nah. Cool.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Do you have any like challenges that come up with like we talked about earlier, everything can be, summed up as an inconvenience, essentially. So are there any inconveniences that pop up when you're doing IT work that like stand out to you?
Yeah, there's stuff with like carrying stuff that always comes up. You have to carry like, a bunch of computer parts or something like that. There's also times where like any kind of physical work, like running cable, uh, just ripe for inconvenience doing that.
Mhm.
Um, I type pretty quickly. I mean, there's stuff with it's mainly like my back can be a problem. So if I have to work at somebody else's desk that's not set up ergonomically like mine is, for example, that can be hard on my back. Or if I'm in a little server closet all hunched over working on my little laptop, that is just, I'm going to be feeling that for a day or two. Um, yeah, so that's where like my anatomy can get in the way. But for the most part, IT is a pretty safe place to be uh, for a lot of different disabilities because most of it is just on a computer. And
Yeah,
while there is a lot of urgency, quote unquote, urgency in the IT world, for the most part, um, yeah, you don't have to stress unless you're stress, unless you're prone to stress. There's not a lot to actually stress about in IT because it's a lot of procedure. It's a lot of, uh, the solutions are there. It's just a matter of can you find them and implement them in whatever the time frame is. That's why I
yeah,
like working for a school because unlike a hotel, if the internet goes down or something, they're not losing money. It's like
right.
teachers can keep teaching. They just have to switch to projectors or whatever it is. while you work on fixing the problem. At a hotel or a restaurant, that could be a little more stressful, but for the
And
most part,
customers are the
depending,
worst, huh?
yeah,
Customers are crazy. Yeah, it's
depending
like
on your role though, it's like, oh, the internet's down, it's frontiers. Well, it's okay. I don't have to stress about it because it's not, I mean, that's their problem now. And
Yeah.
you just have to
Uh,
have good
we,
bedside manner.
we were talking to Ricky over at the high school the other
Hmm.
day, and he was telling us about just the pain in the ass of replacing their entire network over there.
Yep. I helped them with
And
some of that. Yeah.
oh, you
'Cause
did?
yeah, they went all from Cisco and Sonic Wall stuff to Meraki. So I came in when they first started that to help them configure that stuff. And it was a pain. Yeah,
yeah,
I can
okay,
I can
cool.
testify.
It's crazy because we were just talking to him like a couple of days ago, and here's someone else that was on that job. Oh, it's crazy.
It all
Yeah,
comes full circle.
yeah, because he was telling us like how insane it was and like how they had to do all of this before school started all during the summer. I'm like,
Yes,
ooh,
it was uh I was with the vendor that actually built a lot of that stuff originally, and then it was really overcomplicated. And you know, there's times where you want to do a direct replacement and then make changes, so that way the actual implementation goes smoothly. Because it can be harder if you want to change everything with changes to the topology. I don't know if I'm explaining that well enough.
mm,
Uh, but for example, I don't want to get too into the weeds about like what their infrastructure looks like, but I can tell you that they're planning on removing a bunch of hardware. So they're not only going to bring in a bunch of new stuff, they were going to remove stuff. So now like the actual infrastructure in a rather than just changing the product line, they're changing the actual infrastructure and the way things are routed. And that just adds another layer of difficulty versus replacing everything exactly the same, just with new products and
Yeah.
then scaling it from there. There's a necessity to do it the way that they did it. But it's really hard because you have to first understand the entire topology, then you have to
mhm.
design the brand new one, and then you have to have kind of like this conversion layer as you go in between the two, because it's not you don't remove everything at once and put in new stuff. There's a tandem kind of deal for a while, and
Yeah,
ripe for compatibility issues and headaches galore. So yeah, I'm glad I wasn't there
Yeah.
for the
yeah.
end of it, but so
And Ricky alluded to that because like the old system at the high school is just like crazy, like from the 70s and just like really archaic. And like the way Ricky described it was every now and then, oh, if it's not working, duct tape or
Yeah.
some like some sort of band-aid fix, and just like 30 years of just shenanigans. I'm like, oh,
yeah, that's the kind of stuff I just can't stand. And like, where I'm currently at and as a consultant, it was the kind of thing. It's like, do it right. Don't be, I'm always the next guy who has to clean stuff up. So, and I had a mentor who really inspirational to me, but he was the kind of guy, he taught me all the cabling stuff. And he's like, if we say this is going to take an hour and it takes us 3, we're billing for an hour, but we're going to spend those other 2 doing it right. So the next guy doesn't get left with this mess. Never do what we have to, the mess that we inherit, never do that to anybody else. And as a consultant, what's also nice is you get to pick and choose jobs. And there's times where it's like, hey, this is the right way to do something. And, they say, oh, well, we really don't want to do it that way. And it's like, well, unfortunately, I'm not the kind of person that does Band-Aid fixes or maintains an inadequate infrastructure. So when you're ready for the next step, give me a call. Um, but and also, I mean, why would I want to constantly be on the hook for something?
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of success as you drive through solving. I don't want to list all, my clients, but as you drive down Mission Street, a lot of those are my clients, and I haven't had to go back in years because they're solid. They just
Yeah.
like I do a lot of networking stuff. So and that feels good because it was done right. And yet I've been places early in my career where you have to go back 5, 6 times a week for a few months just fixing this thing that keeps going out, keeps going out, keeps going out, and finally be like, look how much you spent on me versus how much the fix would have been. So I don't know. Yeah, it just systemic issues like that. I just
Yeah.
can't stand that.
Got you. Got you. Well, that's cool, man. It sounds like you're doing what you love and you're having a good time doing it. Um, Before we let you go, do you have any like things you want to shout out, like plug your YouTube channels and whatnot?
Yeah, I'll give you those again. VictorMcConnell.com. You can just look up Victor McConnell on YouTube as well. And then One Armed Freak. That's the other handle I operate on. That's the number 1, ARMEDFREAK. So
Yeah, when I first reached out to you, I was like, oh, by the way, I dig the username.
yes.
hmm
Yeah,
cool.
so,
Yeah.
some kids would call me a freak. And actually it was my little brother when we were figuring out my Xbox gamer tag. He's like, why don't you use One Armed Freak? Like the kids call you. And I'm like, oh, there you go. So
There's a streamer I follow, and he has SMA, and his handle is like cripple threat.
oh, that's great.
Oh,
Love stuff like that. All right. Well, any final thoughts, comments, questions, concerns?
no, I'm
Good.
satisfied. That was great. This was a great episode.
This was
I love
fun.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
do it again. Yeah, round two for sure.
It's fun to have these, deeper conversations with like-minded people. Um, it's quite the opposite feeling of, the interaction I mentioned from El Rancho, where it's very surface level, and these are meaningful conversations. So
Yeah, another topic we'll get into at some point, but I'll leave you with this. I'm also very into Alan Watts, and I know that a lot of people with disabilities end up finding Alan Watts.
yes,
And so I mean, there's a whole nother podcast right there. So
yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I've always been a big fan of philosophy,
mhm.
and I've taken a couple of courses, and definitely come across Alan Watts myself, both in class and outside of. So
Hmm.
that'd be fun to talk about in another episode for sure, for sure. All right, guys. Well, if you liked what we had to say today, please leave us that rating, a nice little review, perhaps on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to share with your friends and your family. If you're not already, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at The Disability Myth, all one word. And with my whole spiel done, peace and love, and may the force be with
Thank you
bye.
guys.
you. All right.